Welcome to Regarding Men, a place where we hold men in high regard and where, guess what? Red pill isolation comes to die a fiery death. Indeed, and today Janice, Paul, and myself are going to be talking with a gentleman named Greg Ellis. Now, Greg is a fascinating guy, very successful guy in Hollywood, doing things that most of us could only dream about. Things like directing Hollywood superstars, producing and writing TV shows, starring in Broadway productions, and on and on. Successful guy, right? But Greg's more than that. Because Greg's also a loving father. A loving father of his two boys. And guess what? The gynocentric tentacles of the family court system came out and hijacked both his fatherhood and his career with false accusations about him as a dad, ruining his life, basically. Ugh, we've seen that before, haven't we? But what we haven't seen before is someone writing a book about it that's as compelling as what Greg has written. My gosh, he wrote this book. The title is The Respondent Exposing the Cartel of Family Law. And it is quite a book. I've read it, and let me tell you something. It sucks you in. It sucks you in. It reads like a novel. You want to turn the next page to find out what happens, because Greg is a storyteller, right? That's what his job is, telling stories. And the book doesn't fail you. It tells the story, and as it does, you get a sense of what he went through. This is exactly what we need to do. We need to have more and more men's stories where we get it out there, where people can see, hear, and feel what men go through, the pain they go through. Because that's the only way to get to people. You know, you can give statistics until you're blue in the face, but it doesn't really make the same kind of impact it does when you can really tell the story. Anyway, let's join the conversation with Janice, Paul, and myself and Greg, and you'll learn a lot more. Here we go.
It wasn't an easy book to write. I'll say that. I didn't want to write the book. I had to write the book. It was like revisiting the trauma. Every single time that I sat down to write. And there was one page, the letter to my sons, it took about 56 attempts over probably a year. Because every time I sat down to even think about what I was going to write, I just broke. I was done. So
this is your healing. This is grief. This is men's grief.
The Achilles heel, I think, is when, men who love their children. Like, I was the emotionally connected parent. I was that, ever-present, loving. I was a brilliant dad, a brilliant father. I was the, poster boy for dads. So if it could happen to me, it does, and will continue to keep happening to many more. And what I've been finding out since writing the book as well, doing some research into child trafficking and the system at large, and the legislation that's been passed. And I'm involved now with an investigative documentary, which is quite exciting, to expose individuals within the cartel of family law. Can't talk too much about that, but it's really cool investigative journalism where we focus on one particular individual, one nefarious individual who has power over judges and attorneys, and we out them. So there's that. And also, a couple of weeks ago, I had a phone call from a chairman of a movie studio who'd read the book and loved the book, and invited me in to meet with him and his film and TV departments. And long, short, and the tall of it, we're now in business to do a limited TV series. They wanted to do a movie, and my argument for not doing a movie is that it's standalone and then it goes away, whereas a limited TV series of 6, 7 episodes, we can really get into all of the different personal and professional narratives and stories and legal situations, and tell more of the story of what happens to the respondent, whoever the respondent is.
Yes.
Wow.
I love the idea
great.
that you're going to be actually naming people. I don't know if you saw Joe Sorge's documentary Divorce Corp, did several years back. And he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't go after individuals that needed to be named.
Well, what's interesting with the book, Paul, it was kind of a personal quest of mine to name people. And then when I started working with the publisher, obviously they're a little bit more conservative when it comes to naming people and leaving yourself open for lawsuits and whatnot. So there were a couple of people whose names were in the original drafts of the book that didn't end up being in there. But for the most part, most of the names are there, and the names have not been changed to protect the guilty, which is the opposite
Exactly.
way to say, to protect the innocent. And particularly these judges and these attorneys, and I tried as best as I could to not pass a judgment in the book. So easy to, I got rid of so many chapters and paragraphs and pages that were just me espousing on particular individuals. But it was, then it becomes, your perception is that you're an angry, bitter man. And I'm not angry and bitter. I don't have anger. I don't have bitterness. I'm all about, the recovery and redemption and owning and accepting responsibility for everything that's happened in my life up until this day right now. And I think that's really what the respondent theme is no blame, no fault, just accountability. That doesn't mean to say we can't call people out, because I'm going to be calling people out. To your point, Paul, this one particular individual, I wish I could mention their name right now, but I can't, because we're investigating them. But some of the behavior, some of this depraved behavior to do with children. When you think about it, 4,000 children a day lose a parent in family law. Where do those 4,000 children go? What's incentivizing the state and the federal government? What's incentivizing the agencies and the state agencies to put so many children be taken from their homes? And where do they end up? And who's getting paid? And what's happening to these children? So, the US having the single highest rate of children growing up in single parent families or households is a staggering statistic, and there's obviously many reasons and causes for it. But and the three of you know way more about that than I am. Just new to this game.
One of the things
you may be new, but you have the problem nailed down.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you explained it really, really well. My favorite thing about the book was that it reads like a novel. It really does. For anybody who hasn't read this book yet, once you start reading it, you're hooked. You're in it like a good novel. And Greg is a storyteller, man. He's a storyteller par excellence, and you get pulled right into it. And that really works well, because then you embed a little bit of data here and there about men's rights. Kind of embed it slowly into the story. And for people who are purple pill or blue pill, it's going to help kind of move them towards that red pill idea. But
are we doing the interview now?
I think we should just go ahead and start.
Pre-interview. Yeah, let's start.
Yeah. And I figure we're not going to have a what would you call it, a formal beginning. We'll just it's going to be a conversation.
Yep.
Is that all right with people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but you're going to introduce Greg,
before
right?
Janice interrupted me, is that in telling the story in such a gripping way, you get people to identify with you, and then they have to understand the pain that you're going through, because that's what we're missing today. We know all about statistics. We know all about, the things that happen to people, but we do not see what's underneath. The chaos, the helplessness, the hopelessness, the isolation that runs underneath a false accusation and parental alienation. And your book exposes that. And man, I thank you for that, because I've seen this over and over again for years. And I've seen that part of things never gets exposed. People don't see it. So
thank you. When I started writing the book, I think I've gone through about 20 different versions of. I could have probably had about 20 books. Different titles of the book, and there was one iteration of the book that simply was called "The 6 Silver Bullets of High Conflict Divorce and the Magic Ballistics of Family Law," focusing on these silver bullets, the go-to playbook that's used with false allegations of domestic violence. And then where I settled on was this narrative. So it was a psychological dystopian, terrifying descent into the Kafka trap, if you will. And I felt very much alone. And I think many men and fathers, and sometimes mothers and women, because this does happen to mothers and women too. It's a lot rarer, but it does happen. it's that sense that you're on your own, and life is, you almost consider, you're considering, am I insane? Am I mad? My entire life is turned upside down. All of what I believed until that point on March 5th, 2015, suddenly became unreal. Suddenly became terrifying and chilling. I was living on the razor's edge of existential terror and angst. And having had everything removed from me in an instant, I didn't think that America, of all countries, would allow that, would allow people law enforcement to enter my home without a warrant, to remove me in handcuffs without any cause. And for this quasi-kangaroo, one branch of our legal system that doesn't provide presumption of innocence or due process, to find me guilty until proven more guilty. So I remember entering the courtroom the first time and thinking, finally, I'm going to get some relief. The American justice system will provide me with relief. And I walked into the Stanley Moss Courthouse, and I left America and entered the Star Chamber of Family Law. And that's when the story, I do continue my thread of the story, but I introduce more themes and experts and, people that have been working in this arena like yourselves and other people with organizations and movements for a long, long, long time, to make sense, because I think that's important, is how do we sense make? For example, how do we talk about these issues? To put a book out, I'm a Caucasian, middle-aged, heterosexual male from Hollywood, with a whiny sob story about what happened to me. Most people are going to be like, who cares? And, given cancel culture and, toxic masculinity, I think it's not just sharing the message through the media, it's how the message is shared and the tone of the message, and providing maybe some hope, and really unpacking some of what I found profoundly unfair and still do. For example, I talk about false allegations of domestic violence, which I think is the silver bullet, the go-to playbook of family law. Yep. For disgruntled spouses and attorneys and law firms. 86% of domestic abuse allegations resulting in TROs, temporary restraining orders, or EPOs, emergency protection orders, are not sustained once the case moves to permanency or evidentiary hearing. Now, this shows clearly that the majority of domestic violence allegations are false or unprovable. So with no accountability, because domestic violence isn't tried in criminal courts, which it should be, it's a criminal offense, and if one is accused of domestic violence, one would have rights. There's the irony. And Mike McCormack, who's the executive director of my new charity, CPU, Children and Parents United, he tells a story about 20-something years ago. He pleaded with the judge to handcuff him and have the bailiff arrest me. Right. When he was falsely accused of domestic violence. And his point was, I at least get rights as a criminal. So I think these false allegations and making people accountable for them is really important, because it's an affront to the real victims of domestic violence. So
it's an affront to the victims of the false allegations too.
Really?
I want to stop you there, Greg, because like in your case, this was actually one thing I didn't quite understand in the book. Somebody phoned in a false allegation, and that began your entire ordeal, turned your life upside down. You lost everything. You lost contact with your children. You lost faith in your spouse. You lost your reputation. You lost the ability to go into your own home that you had worked for and paid for. You lost countless friends. And did you ever find out, was it your wife that phoned in that false allegation, a ridiculous statement that you had been overheard to say? What were the exact words? I'm sick of this. I'm going to harm the children.
It's on the front page of the book. It's 10 words. So what happened was to give you a little, I think I mentioned this in the book, but I'll just refresh. March 5th, 2015, I'd taken the afternoon off to just spend some time with my sons. They were 8 and 10 at the time, and we were in the playroom, and they were playing and reading, and we were just laughing and joking. And she called, and I put her on the she was out of town on business, and I put her on the phone with my eldest son, Charlie, and when Charlie was speaking with her, and I said, make sure to put, younger brother on the phone afterwards. And he just went, she hung up, Dad. And I went, oh, I didn't really think too much more of it. And then a couple of minutes later, there was a knock on the door. The doorbell rang, actually. And I went down, and it was two LAPD officers that quickly became 3, and then 4, and then a sergeant, and then so on and so forth. And that's how the story begins. Unbeknownst to me, what had happened was my ex-wife suffered from panic disorder. She was diagnosed with panic disorders. So she would have these panic attacks that she would behave irrationally, which isn't a crime. And I was completely empathic to when we were married. We were 20 years married and no problems. My feeling is she'd gone off the medication. My feeling is she had a panic attack and wasn't thinking rationally. And what happened was she then called the police and said, you need to go to my house. My husband is confused. And the police said, we can't go to the house because he's confused. There's no cause to go to the house. And she said, what do you need to hear? And they said, we need to hear he's a threat to himself or the children. And apparently she then called back and said, my husband's just told me, quote, I'm sick of this shit. I'm gonna harm the children. And that 10-word lie was the Pandora's box that opened everything. And I'm still not sure if she's even aware, because I'm still not sure if she actually was having a panic attack at the time, that she can recollect saying that, or the damage it caused, or I don't know, maybe I'm giving her too much credit, but I think what then happened with the system coming in and doing what it does, which she had no idea about, and I clearly had no idea about, that set off a train of events. And that hearsay, which is what it is, hearsay of 10 words, started to become documented, as I got taken away, and the police obviously had written it down because she said it, and if she said it, then it's fact. And without due process, without presumption of innocence, fiction becomes fact. The most absurd, abhorrent comment can become, the stain that follows you. And everyone who knows me and knew me knows that it's so ridiculous. I mean, even the colloquialism of those 10 words, I wouldn't say that.
Right. Right.
Say that. So that was really and I didn't know for a long time, Janice, who had called that in, what had been said, and why it had been said. And that's one of the things about this is when you're incoherent and staggering, homeless and almost destitute, trying to just survive, and then you're thrust into the legal cauldron of family law, and you're on trial, and there's attorneys and witnesses, and it takes a long time to just get back to your feet and get coherent again. I remember I was curled up in a ball on the floor at one point early on, at my friend's. I was staying on my friend's sofa, and all the blinds were closed, couldn't have any sound on, couldn't listen, couldn't hear another human being, because even the sight or sound of a child just devastated me, because my boys, all I kept thinking about was, what are my boys going through? Their dad was removed. Suddenly they wake up and dad, who's there every day, is not there, and the stories they were getting told. And then to find out that they were being told that I was, that my brain was broken, that I was bipolar, I was psychotic, all of this, they're 8 and 10.
That you were a danger to them.
That they should fear me. And it was a consistent theme from mother and from mother-in-law as well, and the system coming in.
Right.
It was a few months later I got the DCFS report, a 53-page report, and I remember reading it and weeping. Just the questions that my sons were asked. Did Daddy ever stick a needle in your arm? Did Daddy ever touch your penis? Did Daddy? I mean, there was no reason for my sons to be asked that whatsoever. But I did read it with great pride as well, because they were young and susceptible to adults, and probably wanting, thinking, what do I have to say? But they were clear as day about their love for me and how great of a dad I was. So, they did their best for the first, I'd say for the first year, 18 months. All of the documented evidence was clear that there was a massive campaign of parental alienation from their mother and from their mother-in-law.
Yep.
And yet the courts, they didn't care.
Greg, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about some of the personal aspect of this. And first, I want to acknowledge, I think you did a fantastic job of not giving yourself a pass in the book. You acknowledge your own mistakes, and you held yourself to account, which I think lends a lot to your credibility in this. But one thing I'm curious about, this story unfolds almost like you got hit by a truck. Like you were walking down the street and it came up behind you and slammed you. I'm just wondering, was there anything in your wife or her mother at the time for all those years that would have ever led you to believe that they were capable of such treachery at this time? Or was this just a total blindside?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Well, thank you for your kind words, first of all, and it's a great question. Yeah, I think, I'd witnessed my ex-mother-in-law and her sister. They fell out one time. They're from Kentucky, from Harlan County, Kentucky. And they fell out one time because one of them thought that the other had ordered the wrong appetizer at a restaurant when the other one went to the restroom. And they didn't speak for 2 years. And so I remember trying to always bring them together and be the kind of, the moderator between the kind of feudal system in the family. Mother-in-law was, I think, 3 times married, and the only good thing she ever said to my ex-wife or anyone in anyone's presence about my ex-wife's father was the only good thing he ever did was provide sperm for your existence.
Right.
So there was a strain of overt man contempt, I guess you could say, and really just from ex-wife, it was just at times very like her childhood friend who she perceived after many years had wronged her. There was no attempt to talk things through or talk things out. I remember it was this. She'd do 3 swipes and go, done. And when she said done, like, she was done. It was like, there was no, I would try and reason. I'm always trying to find the good in people and give people the benefit of the doubt. And, you grow up with her. She's, you were 5 when you first met, and you've known her for 30 years. Don't care, done. So I guess looking back, I should have been more cognizant and aware, but trust is a valuable commodity, and I trusted, our marriage and her, and even after the events of March 5th, I still trusted. I'm like, if I can only get to her and have a conversation, but the darker forces of the family system, the projections onto a scapegoat, they were in full psychological play, and there was nothing I could do, little I could do to affect any kind of different outcome.
Yeah. Greg, what do you want this book to do? What do you think?
Gosh, that's a good question. What I want it to do, I was asked early on by publishers, PR and marketing, who do you consider as the target demographic? And I didn't really have a smart Hollywood, response for that. I think I remember saying 10 divorced men take their own lives every day in America. I just want to get that number down to 9 on any given day, or 8 on any given day, and save a life here and there. Because if you save one life, you're relieving brothers, sisters, mothers, daughters, fathers, grandparents, families.
Yep.
So, I wrote the book. I guess the respondent was part of my therapy.
It was the therapy.
Yeah, one version of the book literally was all about, it was a survival guide. I wrote a small compendium book called The Code, which is now, I've got it as a free downloadable ebook on my website, therespondent.com. For anyone who buys The Respondent, they can download this free downloadable ebook. And that really is tips, strategies, immediate interventions into well-being, somatic, psychological, for people who are in the courtroom, waiting in a court corridor, about to go to court, just need relief. Their organism needs relief, mind and body and spirit. But I wrote I wrote the book to make sense, I think, of the government-sponsored devastation of my life and destruction of
Yes.
my family. I
Yes.
wrote it to let my children know, that my sons know that I hadn't abandoned them. I wrote it to tell other similarly situated men and women, mothers and fathers, but predominantly men because I am, fathers because I am a man and a father, that they're not alone. And perhaps most of all, I wrote it to ring the alarm bell about a broken system and call for social change and family law reform.
Yes.
And some very clear ideas of what needs to be done to at least improve the system, legally and social policies and legislation, but also what I'm working on with my charity, which is to help develop programs that can keep people out of court and keep the money in the pockets of families, parents, and children's inheritances, rather than going into law firms and attorneys and these
Yes. Amen.
vagabonds.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there
Wow.
anything looking back on this is, one of the things you just described is that there were indicators. And of course, I'm not saying that you had really any way of being able to predict the severity of your future at the time. But looking back on what you chose to overlook or what you didn't see very clearly earlier on, is there anything different about how you approach life and women now that would be different about you and in what you will choose for the future?
That's a poignant question, Paul. Yes, I learned a tremendous amount. I went on, I guess I went on some kind of, it was an odyssey and it was a quest really. The more the system, because I was thrust into this system that kept telling me I was something, whether it be an identifier or, whether it be her saying that I was bipolar and psychotic, or whether it's, I needed to go to this recovery center and do this and to give the patina that I was, working hard to overcome these perceived inadequacies. And so I learned about, I learned about a lot about addiction, even though in the kind of general sense of the word, I'm not an addict and never have been.
Yes.
I do talk about addictive behavior patterns, which I think is that 13th step that they don't cover in the very valuable 12-step program. We're all kind of influenced by our intergenerational DNA of how we behave, how we move through the world, and becoming more aware of that. I learned about philosophy. I connected with people that I would never have connected with before. I looked outside of Hollywood. I sat down one night and asked myself the Socrates question, who am I? And I answered that and went into a deep dive dialectic. And within an hour and a half, I had 1,100 questions and answers. That was my dialectic kind of roadmap as to who I am. And sought to understand. The more the system told me I'm this, the more I didn't accept it, because the system telling me. I remember one guy saying to me at this. I remember sitting at my first AA meeting, and I'd been told by, if you remember, the facilitator from the book, Kevin Berman, and he said, you just have to go and you have to create a kind of trail of a record that you can show to the court to show that you're making amends, even though there's nothing to have made amends for. And I'm like, well, what's this about? So they're going, I'm just sitting there, people going around and going, my name's John, I'm an alcoholic. Hey, John. And it got to me and I said, my name's Greg. I'm here to create a new record for the family law system.
Good for you.
And then everyone else is going, yeah, right. Clearly, he's in denial. And I'm just novice. I'm novice. And I'm in this place called the Life Healing Center in Santa Fe. And there's all these people. And by that point, I just spent 6 straight days with very little sleep in the mental institution from hell, the Temple of Doom. I got out, been detained again, then thrown on a flight, hadn't had a change of clothes. And that whole night, they put me on suicide watch, which was, they flash a light in my eyes every half hour. So it was literal torture, sleep deprivation. And then that morning I woke up and did that. I'm probably not answering your question, Paul, but in terms of how I approach, look, I learned a lot about interpersonal communication. I learned a lot about integrity, integration, shame. I studied shame and vulnerability to a great degree with one of my mentors. I learned about affect theory with my current mentor, Dr. Gary David, and just opened my curiosity to learn and start reading. I'd never really read before. And what was bizarre was when this happened, about a year after this happened, my vocabulary opened up. I was using words I didn't even know existed before. And I just became a slave to reading rather than before. For years, I'd never read books. I'd always read scripts, and it was about, learning lines for TV roles and movie jobs. And but I can't get enough of books and the great corpus of literature now. And then I wrote a poetry book, and that was a reliever. I think I turned to arts to relieve. And then I wrote a pocket oracle of philosophical quotes called No Thing in Between. But in terms of your question, Paul, about women, I think my trust, understandably, was shattered for a while. And I think I'm a firm believer, I wrote this in one of my books early on, you can only fully love another until you fully love yourself, and you can only love yourself once you know yourself. So you've got to get to know yourself first. And I think many people have, and maybe I was like this, an inherited belief system and core values and principles and the foundation of oneself, capital S. And one doesn't take the time to explore, question them, break through beyond pre-existing belief systems, leave a little nuance and doubt. And so I'm a little bit more circumspect now. I'm a little older. And I don't, gosh, I love women. I mean, that's all I can say. And I just like I don't love all men, I don't love all women. There are some really pernicious, toxic feminists out there. Let's just say it. There really are. And what I've seen over the last couple of years, particularly in our current culture, is this rise of rabid, angry, misandrist, third, fourth wave, postmodern, progressive, neo-Marxist, frankly, wacky feminism that just wants to hate any and all males. And that's nuts. That's dangerous. Those people need to be called out. How we call them out, it's like, I was talking the other day about feminism. I think, there are people like, I mentioned Janice and Camille Paglia and Christina Hoff Sommers, and the list goes on, of empowerment feminists and factual feminists and equality feminists and the great women who've been doing this work for so many years. And they're the women I want to champion and speak to and really hold dear in my mind's eye. The other brand of feminism, I don't think has any, but I see it in so many positions of importance these days. The gatekeepers, in the publishing world and the entertainment industry, and news media, and sometimes it's that rabid brand of feminism that isn't even female. It's male that's imported that. We can talk about the anima and the animus, but so how one has these conversations about whether you, I'm new to the whole colors of pill. I didn't realize there was red and purple pills. What's that? What's a purple pill, Tom?
It's halfway in between the red and the blue.
Okay.
It's someone who's starting to come around and see a red pill perspective.
Oh, okay.
We're calling
Who's
purple
still
pills.
hanging on to their old beliefs for dear life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I think our beliefs are ever evolving, aren't they? They should be.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And your answer brought a couple of things to mind. One I want to get to in particular. I mean, those of us who have been looking at this for a long time find that there's two different versions of feminism. There's feminism on paper, which is a great idea for equal treatment under the law and equal opportunity. But then there's feminism as it's actually practiced, as we see it expressed in our governance, in our family courts, in the United Nations, in even in geopolitics. There is this narrative that men are oppressors and women are oppressed, and that itself is feminism. I mean, if we look at it in its reality, the equity feminists that you mentioned do great work, but is that work expressed in policy? And we find that it's not. And I just wonder if your views of feminism itself and what that word actually means has been altered any by your experience.
I didn't even think about feminism before March 5th, 2015. Right. I didn't look upon women as any less than or more than me. There was no, anti-dependent nature and worth and value, and just individual people. And look, when I see, I don't get involved in politics too much because it's not my area of expertise. But when I see the president of the United States on the first day in office sign an executive order for gender equity, and it says equality for all peoples, that's enough for me. But then it has dash, particularly women and girls. Hang on a second, time out. That's not equality. Like there's this moral hypocrisy that I see, and it's in legislation. When I was working with, at the end of last year, a couple of people from the House of Lords and this new bill, the Domestic Abuse Against Women and Girls bill in the UK, two things astonished me. One was there was actually a debate on whether parental alienation was actually a thing and existed. Mm-hmm. And in 2019, it was designated a mental health disorder finally by the World Health Organization, for what that's worth. But the second thing that was astonishing was that it was a domestic abuse bill for women and girls. So no protections for baby boys, no protections for gay men, for non-binary. This is hypocrisy. It's not equality. There's a women's minister. Well, shouldn't there be a men's minister? I mean, can't we just have a minister for equality? Why does it have to be a minister for equality for women? So it's this kind of hypocrisy that I see across the board. And then I didn't even know there were all these victims commissioners in the UK. I was astonished, and then I looked more into these victims commissioners, and it's like the ultimate boondoggle. The victimhood is the new social currency, and it's the economy's booming. Exactly. And when victimhood is rewarded, responsibility never follows. And again, that's not to say that, and again, it's an affront to the real victims. Now, I think the London's victims commissioner, she had a harrowing experience at the hands of a man, not men, a man. And that's horrible and abhorrent. But the way she goes about her business, you'd have thought the entirety of the male race, the male population of the world had wronged her. Yep. So the people that are alive, and also the organizations, I mean, this is the other thing that's so difficult, I think, when we talk about some of the work that you and all the other good people for many years, decades have been doing, how to actually gain some traction and momentum and get some change. Is when you're looking at organizations like Refuge and Women's Aid, which on the surface, when you read about them, they're noble, they're good, they're change agents, they're doing good things. But when you look underneath the surface at who's running them and how they're getting their money and how much money they're getting, they are really bad organizations. Women's Aid, not a good organization whatsoever. Refuge, started by Erin Pizzey 51 years ago. Mm-hmm. Erin, who found out that many of the women that were coming into a shelter were violent, and not the end of the world, just a fact, and she stated it. And of course, cat gets poisoned, bomb squad sent to her house, hounded out of England, and now can't even set foot in her own shelter that she started. And that was the first first shelter in the world 51 years ago. So you have this pernicious brand of radical feminism running these organizations and virtue signaling victimhood to the nth degree and making all the money. And in America, as far as I can see with family law, the reason why there hasn't been improvement and reform, it's two main groups. It's that group, the domestic abuse group, groups, and the American divorce industry, the $60 billion a year American divorce machine.
Yes. And what this
I
has
would
done.
like to add one more to that calculation, if I could. I do think that there is a lot of culpability in the American right too, in terms of blindly endorsing these policies, and
Of course.
acting out of some sort of misguided chivalry to crush men in our family courts, and they end up destroying their children.
And what this misguided misery has done is created a place where women can utilize the government as a third-party abuser, just like what happened with Greg.
Yeah, I want to tap on something, because I've only just recently started to look at this, the legislation and the like, for example, CPS. I was staggered that the DCFS, or CPS, Department of Children and Family Services, or CPS, could come into my home and remove me in handcuffs and threaten my sons to threaten my ex-wife at the time when I was removed, saying, unless you start divorce proceedings and get a restraining order, your sons will be taken into foster care. And when I looked into this, I found since that for decades, like 30, 40, 50 years, children are being removed intentionally from their homes, seized from their families for profit, snatched, kidnapped, legally trafficked, all due to legislation that was passed and introduced in 1974, the Adoption and Safe Families Act.
Huh.
So that offers financial incentives to states that increase adoption numbers. So we're financially incentivizing adoption numbers, and to receive the adoption incentives and bonuses, the local Child Protection Services or Department of Children and Family Services must have more children. They must have more merchandise to sell. Think about that, kids and merchandise. So funding becomes available when a child is placed in a foster home with strangers, or placed, as is often the case, in a mental health facility and medicated, as it's called, usually against the parents' wishes. So parents are being victimized by the system that makes a profit. They actually make more money for holding children longer, and bonuses. They give bonuses for not returning the children to their parents. This is to me, this is a growing global criminal and political scandal, and the judiciary are involved literally with child trafficking. And the most harrowing part of this, I'll just finish up by saying, because this is the poor parents, destitute families are the ones targeted the most, and that they lose their children because they do not have the wherewithal or the resources to hire an attorney or fight the system. So that's just one act of legislation in 1974, all those years ago. And you look at the rates of foster care, 6 times the amount of children die in foster care than origin homes. Mm-hmm. And the money involved is staggering. So I'm only beginning to look into more of this, and why this is incentivized child trafficking and kidnapping.
Potent.
It's staggering. I mean, I can't believe that I'm actually.
And thank you for your efforts with this.
People have no idea this is going. Well, many people do. I was told by someone in a very influential position that there's people in positions of power who know this is going on, and yet they choose not to speak out for fear of losing their livelihood. And then there are others who know it's going on, who don't want their dirty little secrets to get out, because if they do, will find out about their nefarious, depraved acts with children.
Yes.
So, and one person I know, you're probably aware of her. I was really excited to talk to Heather McDonald about this, about family law. I've spoken to quite a few attorneys, but Heather, being a very skilled attorney, and she knew we were going to talk about family law, and yet she avoided the questions. The first 2 questions, it's not my area of expertise, it's not my area of expertise. And I understand Heather probably doesn't want to talk about it because she's got, a good job at the Manhattan Institute, and, people lose their livelihoods if they talk about this. But ultimately, how can we not speak about this and have this on our conscience? This is children. This is 4,000 children a day, and my question to Heather was really to do with the legal system. It's the one branch of the legal system that doesn't have a presumption of innocence. Mm-hmm. So why do criminals get more rights? criminals, pedophiles, murderers, rapists, terrorists than parents, partners, and children in America. That's just wrong.
It is wrong. And thank you for stepping up. You know,
Sure.
Yeah,
Indeed.
exactly. I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of people, a lot of men don't know about any of this going on until it happens to them, aren't
Right.
even maybe particularly
Exactly.
interested in knowing. It's hard to
Right.
believe, actually, when you start to delve into it. If you hear one
Yes.
person's story, you think it can't really have happened like that. Like your question when you were in the police car, being detained, how could this be America? How can this be happening in America? It's the question that a lot of people don't want to confront, because it is too staggering to think that this has been going on, not just for a few years, for decades.
Yes.
We have allowed it. We have enabled it in all sorts of ways. We have supported legislation that has made it worse. So for a lot of men, it's, and women too, of course, but for women, it's a different situation. But a lot of men, they don't really confront it until it happens to them. And then I think however they respond to it, once it's over, they just want to get on with their lives. You chose instead to really delve into it, to investigate every aspect of it. I mean, you've read Stephen Baskerville. He opens one's eyes to the horrors of
Really?
what goes on.
Good man.
You've written this incredible book combining narrative with deep research into all the issues, the hatred and demonization of men, as you say, the trafficking in children, the deification of women and women's unproven claims being accepted somehow as truth simply because a woman utters it. I mean, you've gone into all of this and produced this incredible book and more, and now you're doing more about it. And so I really appreciate that you didn't just decide, to somehow survive afterwards and to put your head down and hope for the best, but that you have transformed your life and are determined to open other people's eyes to the horrors that are all around us. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you for all the work you've done. I mean, it's look, I'm still learning as I move along through all this, but I do believe that the only way we're really going to bring about meaningful change faster rather than later is through the media and through a singular message. There are obviously multiple things to address, like with family law, equal shared parenting, parental alienation, no presumption of innocence, etc., etc. There are lots of things to address. But I think the more we can come together and speak through at least one chorus of voices, if you will, with multiple different narratives, all with a similar theme and many different stories, but we can bring about some change. And the work that you've been doing in this area, and I obviously have seen Paul's work. Tom, I'm relatively new to your work, but there's so many people who've been at this for so long, and I'm really humbled that I'm part of this and I get to speak about this. And I'll tell you this: no one's going to shut me up. I get now around 30 or 40 emails a day, and I just don't have the bandwidth right now to do personal responses to everyone, because I'm doing this from a kind of top-down approach with the charity and with the messaging of the book and the multimedia aspect of the project. But enough's enough. Our children deserve better. This isn't a left-right issue. This isn't a red pill, blue pill issue. This isn't a man, woman, father, mother issue. This is just human rights. This is basic human rights. And how in America, America, of all places, we can be allowing this to happen.
Changing country we live in right now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a great experiment, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So far.
If I ask Greg, just an afterthought here, how are things for you now with your children?
I don't see my sons. Their father was killed off in their eyes by authors beyond my control and their control. They fought for a year. If you look in the book, I actually put this in there specifically. It was a late edition. I put in there were two independent court-ordered psychological psychiatric evaluations of me, not of her, but of me. And I hummed and hawed about putting them in there, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. 2015 and 2019, both, I think, are pretty damning about her and pretty unequivocal about me.
Yeah.
And the first one has a summary of 69 monitored visitation reports, and you read those, and they're a summary, but you get an idea of the level of parental alienation that my beautiful boys had to endure while their psychologies in their adolescent minds were growing. And they fought so hard for a year. And it's all there to read, but then 5 years worth of brainwashing after that. It's going to be like I think tends to happen in these kinds of situations. In their late 20s, early 30s, maybe. I think it's probably usually later with boys than girls, but who knows? That there will be a reckoning, and that reckoning won't be good for my ex-wife. And of course, hopefully I will still be around, and I will always be here, and the door will always be open for my boys. Yes. We'll continue to not vilify or say anything negative with regards to they want facts and they'll want the truth. And that's part of, the story is, having been voiceless, the story is there. But, in answer to your question, Paul, no, I don't hold out much hope. I still cope with the living grief of the loss of the meaning of my life, because they were and are, a man's boys, a man's sons. It was Caitlin Flanagan who said it takes a mother to raise a boy, it takes a father to raise a man. And those rites of passage, those rituals, those coming of age, mythopoetic passages that I think we're losing, or we've lost more in our current culture recently over the years. Yes. We really need to bring those back in, but we're not going to do it if we have too many dad-deprived boys, and we won't end up having fathers if there aren't any fathers left. I mean, and that's where we're moving towards.
It's crazy, eh?
Yeah,
absolutely insane.
Well, and that is the feminist vision. Like, we should make no mistake about that and say it very clearly, is a world in which there are no fathers involved in raising their sons at all. Their preference is for a world in which mothers and sort of collectives of women, many of them not even related to the child, are the one who raise both daughters and sons. I've seen that written about all over the place. And that's their ideal of a kind of collective, social child rearing system that gets us away from toxic gender roles, etc. And they're quite happy to imagine a future in which fathers play no role at all in the raising of their children.
Use the state as a proxy to extract the funding.
That's it.
Of course, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's astounding. It really is evil.
Yes, evil it is. And maybe that's a good place to stop, eh? Evil as it is. And Greg, thank you so much. What's that?
I was just saying the same thing. Thank you so much. The book is an awesome read.
Read it.
Hello, folks. Support this guy's work. Buy his book. I bought it. It's a wonderful book. It's a great read. It's an infuriating read and a heartbreaking read.
It's heartbreaking.
But it will be a familiar story to many people who watch these discussions.
Yes, and we'll have links below for everyone to go and click on and go see Greg.
Thank you very much.
His book. It's been a pleasure, Greg.
I just want to quickly say that we have to, sometimes a curse can be a calling and become a blessing. This has become my purpose and my mission. And I've just launched my charity, CPU, Children and Parents United. I just want to quickly mention that, just to leave a note of hope. So the mission of CPU is to promote and improve child well-being by providing information and resources to policymakers, legislatures, practitioners, and the general public, really, to result in enhanced relationships and reduce conflicts for those children and parents navigating our current family law systems.
Yes.
And we're developing three real cost-effective, practical, solution-based programs. CPU communication is workshops and programs that provide improved interpersonal relating. So we're talking with people who are really skilled in this area. For example, Dr. Warren Farrell and his couples communication. We've been talking with Warren about doing something with CPU communication. CPU mediation, which is solutions-oriented intervention experts to help resolve conflict disputes, and then CPU law, which is a law firm. So the idea eventually is to have CPU be a law firm. So that would provide legal advice, support the mediation process, and oversee legal procedures. And those three programs are really outside the court system. We may work with the court system, with family law, with those people inside the system who are ethical, who are good, and we'll build out. We have people who've been inside the court system who are now working with us to build out these programs so that we can empower people who maybe don't want to continue staying married to draw up their own dissolution agreement with assistance, cost effective, and keep people out of court. That's what we need to do.
Sounds good. Sounds good to me. That's a good thing. And we always end by saying men
Are
Good.
Don't tell me we did it again. Jeez.
Oh.
All right. Very good. Greg, thanks again.
Take
Good to be
care,
with you.
everybody.
You all take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.